What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Huddle. It is me, Ninja. A big show today. Talking Final Four, both men's and women's a little bit. We're going to talk some MLB, and we're going to talk a little NFL here at the bottom, so you're going to want to stick around for that. But let me welcome my co-host here, Tony Farmer, at Tony's Market Tips on X. Tony, how's it going today, man?
It's going well, man. We got this interesting little week off of March Madness action. You and I have been knees deep in it from the beginning, doing all the live spaces shows, handicapping, obviously watching these games. And so it's almost a little bit of a tease. You're like, March Madness, March Madness, March Madness. And now we got to take a breath here and try not to think about basketball for a week. Only
3 games left. 2 days of our X Spaces content, 11:30 Eastern on game days. So that'll be Saturday and the day of the championship game, of course. So let's get right into that. We know the Final Four, Tony. Bit of a surprise, I would say, 2 of the teams that have punched their ticket in. Let's start with that NC State-Purdue game. We're recording this Wednesday morning, so we've got Purdue 9-point faves, total of 146, and then Alabama, UConn minus 12, total of 160. Starting with NC State-Purdue, Tony. The NC State run has been incredible, obviously. We saw a brilliant Elite Eight performance. DJ Burns, we've talked about him on Spaces, an incredible player to watch. Such a great story to bring into the Final Four here with this Wolfpack team. But what is it, Tony, about this team from your points of view? Like, what happened to them to get hot all of a sudden compared to earlier in the season? This team wasn't on anybody's radar.
Yeah, and not only did they get hot, but they were ice cold immediately before they were hot. So it's a good question. I saw this team live when I was out in Vegas for the Vegas Invitation, or the Vegas Showdown, I think it's called. They played BYU. They did not look very good in that game when I saw them in person. And so the difference between that team and the difference between this team that we're all seeing today is truly night and day. And it's Mohamed Diarra and Michael O'Connell are really the big difference. When you look at these guys' game logs, these are guys who, from November to February combined had 3 games over 30 minutes. They just weren't playing a lot. They were role players, really. And now when you look, O'Connell is got 38.8 minutes a game in this tournament. So he's gone from being a role player earlier in the season to becoming a huge part of this team. And Diarra, kind of the same deal. He's playing significant minutes now. Check this out. So if you take Diarra's 11.8 rebounds per game that he's had in the tournament, if he were to have averaged that throughout the regular season, that's 4th best in the country. And you can do a similar thing with O'Connell. You take his 5.5 assists per game, 30th best in the country, if he could have kept that up throughout the season. My point is, those guys weren't doing that early in the season, and now they are major contributors on this team. They're averaging 6 points a game, Ninja. So it's like, they don't have the name recognition. Everybody's going to talk about DJ Burns, but these guys are really the difference makers. You grew up watching the Expos, am I correct, with Major League Baseball?
Yep, for sure.
Let me give you a little bit of a comparison. Do you remember, I think it was the Expos last season in Major League Baseball, when they traded Orlando Cabrera to the Red Sox for Nomar Garciaparra? Do you remember that in that three-team trade? And the Red Sox got Doug Minkiewicz. Do you remember that?
Doug Minkiewicz is a great name. I forget that trade specifically, but keep going.
So where I'm going with this is, when the Red Sox first traded Nomar, one of the best hitters really in their franchise, beloved, you're kind of like, what are the Red Sox doing? Who is Doug Minkiewicz and Orlando Cabrera? Because Cabrera and Minkiewicz didn't have that name recognition. They didn't have the stats. And I almost see a similar thing with this NC State team. I know it's a different sport. I know it's not a trade, but these aren't new acquisitions, but these guys are newcomers to the starting lineup, and they're having a similar gelling effect on that team, where it's like they're just playing better with these guys in the lineup. And it's fun to watch. This NC State team has been night and day difference, and it's a blast to watch.
Yeah, incredible to watch. And people have been sort of sleeping on them round by round, and they just keep proving everybody else wrong. And you bring up some great numbers there. with a couple of their players, but you're right, DJ Burns has been the star attraction. Both DJs, to be fair. But honestly, dude, if I hear the broadcast team do one more DJ pun during the broadcast when the Wolfpack's playing games, I might just have to mute. It's insane to me. We're going to get into picks here in a second, but let's talk about that Alabama-UConn game here as well. Personally, I'm having not a tough time, but I don't know what to pull the trigger on sides here. I think these games are both lined incredibly well. It's giving me pause whether to bet on one side or the other. But Alabama-UConn, -12, 160 total, of course. But we talked yesterday, you said you've targeted this game as a potential in-game candidate. Why is that? What about this game? What about the spread? What about the total has you eyeing this game for in-game potential?
Yeah, every once in a while you see a game like this where you're like, I'm not touching it pre-flop, but I want to see how things shake out early in the game. Alabama's really dependent on the three-point shot. UConn defends the three-point shot really well. They defend inside really well too. But I want to see if Alabama's getting some open looks early in that game. Not even so much like, are they hitting their shots, but are they getting open looks? Can they get open looks against that UConn defense? That's going to be important to me. And then the tempo piece. Everybody knows Alabama, very fast team. I think they're 9th in adjusted tempo over at Ken Pom. And UConn's one of the slower offenses. They like to take their time. So if early on in that game, I'm seeing Alabama getting a lot of fast break points and UConn, off of their game and having forced to play a different tempo than they like to play, that'll play a factor in the live betting as well. Keep in mind, UConn is a team that even when they've blown teams out by 20, 30 points, even recently in the tournament, they were only up by 5 points at halftime or only up by 9 points at halftime. So be careful with that live betting. Don't get suckered into thinking, wow, Alabama's keeping it close and just focusing on the score. Look at things like the tempo and if Alabama's getting those open three-point shots.
Yeah, a couple great points. And I've got a bet specific to that based on what you were saying there. But let's get into our picks right now. You sort of focused on that NC State-Purdue game. So why don't you take back-to-back picks here and break down what you're eyeballing here as we sit down on Wednesday morning?
Yeah, to use a poker analogy, I may have showed my hand a little bit in talking about NC State from the top. I do like them. I bet them late last night, +9.5. I think it's mostly +9s now. I definitely would still bet it at 9. They've got the experience factor, which I really, really like. They only have one freshman on their entire roster. They've got 4 seniors and 3 juniors who play a significant amount of time. And Purdue's got 3 sophomores in their starting lineup. So when you've got a trip to the national title game on the line, I love that experience factor here for NC State. 9 points is just a lot of points in a game like this. And NC State, they're sneaky. They can create turnovers. We saw them have 8 steals in the first round of the tournament. And Purdue is a team, if there's one beef that you have with this Purdue offense, they can be sloppy with the ball at times and they can give up turnovers. So I could see NC State stealing a couple possessions in this one and keeping it within that 9 points, no problem.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a tough one for me. Both of these games, to be honest. You've got a player prop in that one as well?
Yeah, the second one, thanks. You told me to do 2 in a row, and I was waiting for you to take over there. That's my bad. My second one is in the same game. Zach Edey over 13.5 rebounds. He's been a fun one to bet on the boards in this tournament. I think what's happening here is bookmakers are kind of undervaluing his number because during the season he's averaging 12-something rebounds a game. But you got to take into consideration, and I've said this on our X Spaces too, and Andrew, you're probably sick of hearing me talk about this, but you've got to take into consideration 11 or 12 of those games, Edey had 27 minutes or less because Purdue was up by 20 points, 25 points, and they pulled him early. I don't see that happening in this situation with a trip to the national title game on the line. I think he's going to get his minutes, and I think he's going to go over that rebounding total. Big height advantage, too, over NC State. I mean, Zach Edey has a height advantage over everybody, right, at 7'4". But there's really only 3 guys in that NC State team who are over 6'9". One of them, Middlebrooks, doesn't play a whole bunch. So if this gets like a foul trouble situation, DJ Burns maybe gets into foul trouble early or something like that, Edey's height advantage is going to be even more pronounced. I think he's going to go over that rebound total.
And one you were on in the Elite Eight as well. And I mean, that eclipsed the number super early in that game. So I love that one with Edey. I'm looking at the Bama-UConn game. You sort of alluded to it. I'm going to go Alabama first half, +7. +7 points in the first half here. Like, we know what Alabama wants to do. They want to shoot threes. They want to shoot threes with urgency, and they want to push the pace. And you mentioned that off the top here. They were able to score pretty easily against two fairly highly regarded defenses per KenPom in UNC and Clemson. And considering what they've been through, I don't think they come in with any lack of confidence here. I think they're going to be flying. I think they're going to play their game. The knock was the defense. We know that, but they've been up to the challenge here in the entire tournament, to be fair. Nick Pringle, really the heart and soul of this team on the defensive end. And they follow his lead, especially against Clemson. Had a big block, had the steal, had the boards. Really good box score for him. But Bama has gotten stops when it counts. And let's not forget, in the first half against Illinois, both UConn and the Illini were awful. Until UConn went on that 30-0 run, it was really neck and neck. I'm not saying we get a repeat of that, of course, but I think Alabama can come out swinging, play a much better offensive game than what Illinois did in that first half, and make this first half in the Final Four extremely, extremely interesting. And then off of that one, I've got a player prop here as well. I'm looking at Aaron Estrada, over 4.5 assists here. It's -125. Like you said, Tony, big clash of styles here. UConn likes to play slow. Bama, we know, likes to speed things up. But if the Tide can dictate it and move the ball and hit their shots, then Estrada will get a ton of touches and set the table here for the Tide. Because basically, him and Sears get all the assists on this team. Estrada leads the team with 4.7 per game. Sears next at 4.1, and then nobody averages more than 2. Everybody does get their touches, but Sears and Estrada leading the way here. Estrada has been fantastic all tournament across the board, scoring, rebounds, assists, steals. Such a well-rounded player, but he's been eclipsing this number pretty regularly and consistently for a minute now. 3 of 4 games in the tournament, 5 of his last 6 overall, averaging 5.5 in the tournament. If Bama goes down to UConn, then they'll go down swinging, and I think good senior guard play, i.e. from Estrada, who has been excellent, will have a nice looking box score come the final buzzer in that Final Four game.
I'm glad you brought up that Illinois game, and I don't want to get you off your pick, but I just want to throw this out there. Illinois hadn't scored under 70 points since, I've got it in my notes here, since January 13th.
Wow.
And UConn held them to 52, way under that. That just speaks to how suffocating that UConn defense can be. It's kind of weird. Like, UConn's offense is so good that in a way you forget how good their defense is. And so that's just something to keep in mind in that game as well. But yeah, we got a couple of matchups here. The point spreads are telling us these aren't necessarily going to be the best games. Yeah, but this is why they call it March Madness. We may get games that are a little closer than we think.
And let's talk about, I know that they've put out hypotheticals for the final here. So let's rip through some of these. So Purdue potentially +5.5 dogs against UConn. NC State +14.5 against UConn. NC State +4.5 against Alabama. And Alabama +5.5 against Purdue. I mean, we've got a few good matchups there. What do you think is most likely? And is there anything there, once we know that final matchup, that you would bet immediately once those lines get posted?
Yeah, certainly the best matchup. I think everybody secretly wants to see UConn Purdue. I think there's a lot of brackets out there that end with UConn and Purdue. So a lot of people rooting for that as well. If I'm going to bet one, if NC State can get in this thing, if NC State could upset Purdue, I think you've got to look at them with the points, because when you're looking at these games and the way they're lined now, you have to consider like your perception of NC State right now in this moment, and what is your perception of NC State going to be if they can upset Purdue? What if NC State, and I don't think this is going to happen, but what if NC State beat Purdue by 7 points or 8 points and it was like fairly convincing? all of a sudden you got to start giving them some respect. And all of a sudden those points that they're getting in the finals, you're saying, wow, that's a lot of points. So if either of these dogs were to upset the big dogs in the Final Four and make it to the national championship game, you gotta think about betting them quickly, because the bandwagon is gonna happen quickly. Public bettors are gonna say, "Oh my God, Alabama's so good, they just beat UConn," and there's almost gonna be like an overreaction that you kind of want to get out in front of.
Yeah, it's a really great point. Super intriguing. I think any of those matchups are intriguing, but I think you're right. Like UConn versus Purdue, just from a X's and O's, and Edie against that well-rounded UConn team would be incredible television. So we'll have to see what happens there. Also incredible television, Tony, was LSU versus Iowa in the women's side of March Madness on Monday. And I got to talk about this for a second here. So I tuned in for the second half, and I'd been following, just on my Twitter timeline, Caitlin Clark. Everybody knows the resume, one of the best of all time to do it. But I was immediately drawn in to that game, Iowa LSU on Monday. So here's some factoids, Tony. According to ESPN, the 12.3 million viewers on Monday made it the most watched women's college basketball game ever. It was one of the most viewed games in any sport in America other than the NFL. It outdrew all but one of the 5 games in last year's NBA Finals. According to our guy Ben Fox, it was the most bet on women's college basketball game of all time. And one book said, quote, "It easily outdrew last year's final." So we had the Iowa versus LSU matchup, and now we have an even better game potentially with Iowa against UConn. Marquee matchup, Paige Beckers, Caitlin Clark. Iowa 2-point fave. Caitlin Clark's point total 33.5 with the over at -120. I don't see any numbers for Beckers as we sit here on Wednesday morning. I mean, Tony, do you remember the women's game sort of being this huge? We've had stars in the game all the way back to Cheryl Miller, Diana Taurasi, Candace Parker, and so on, but it's never been more popular than right now, right?
Yeah, I agree. And remember, I grew up in Connecticut. So the women Huskies, even when, women's college basketball wasn't that big of a deal, it still kind of was in Connecticut. I feel like whether you're talking about Sports Center or whether you feel like you're talking about sports betting media shows, etc., I think that when they used to talk about college women's basketball, it felt forced. And I hope that doesn't offend people out there, but that's just how it felt listening. It's like, oh, you're watching SportsCenter. It's like, oh, they kind of have to show the WNBA games even though nobody cares. They kind of have to show the women's basketball games because it's March. Now it doesn't feel forced anymore. It feels like there's actually an appetite for it. I think there's a growing betting appetite for it, certainly. And as you said, with those numbers there, the ratings are there. People care. I talk to a lot of people, Andrew, who tell me, I don't watch the NBA anymore because there's no shooting. It's just big men dunking, and that's not fun to watch. If that's your perspective, I would think you'd be a little more drawn to women's college basketball and women's basketball in general, because there is more shooting. There's more emphasis on the shooting in the game, and it's not just constant slam dunks and power moves inside. There's some of that as well, but it's exciting, man. It's fun. It's great for the sport. I think it's great for sports bettors to have another option. I have to confess, it's not a market that I've bet a lot of at all, but I should, because these markets because they're less bet, there's going to be more edges in the markets, and I should focus more attention on it. So it's something that, with the rise of women's college basketball, bettors should absolutely be aware of it, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been in this industry for close to 15 years. And I remember back in the day, it was always the sort of, worst kept secret that like lines in the WNBA and potentially the women's college game were a bit loose because, there wasn't just that level of effort put into, sorting out the lines, sorting out the odds for these games. I think that's changed. Like we've got 2.5 in Iowa, UConn. And again, I don't know much about the women's game, but I don't know what side to bet because I know that UConn's going to bring everything they can to the table in that Final Four game against Iowa. And Caitlin Clark's 33.5 points. I mean, she went off for 41, I think, against LSU. I mean, she's incredible. And the one thing that stuck out for me about her game was not the shooting, because obviously she's dead-eye from beyond the arc. It was her passing. It was her playmaking. She has such great court vision in transition. Like, she's just teeing up her teammates for baskets. So it was super interesting to watch. And now I can't wait for the women's Final Four either. It's going to be amazing. I do want to talk
Andrew,
a little bit.
Are we gonna have a NC State UConn final on the men and women's side? Wouldn't that be fun?
Can you imagine? Yeah, doubleheader, like, it'd be amazing. Yeah, I can't wait for it, man. I got to say, I am pumped for it. All 4 of those games. Some MLB early season stuff. And I know it's a small sample size here, right? We're only 4 or 5 games, depending on the team, into the season. I talked about 2 teams in our preseason stuff that we did a few weeks ago as teams to bet on, as teams to watch. One was the Pittsburgh Pirates win total going over, and they are 5-0 to start the season. They are at Washington today at around minus 150, I believe. Mitch Keller on the bump for the Pirates. Second was betting the Detroit Tigers for about the first month of the season. So a great start for them, and more winnable games for the Tigers coming up as well. I remember, I think I said we'll dig into the money line standings 1 month into the season, yes. And the Detroit Tigers will be at the top. Some interesting stuff to start the season, though. Road teams have actually gone 49-33 to start the season. They've gone 51-31 on the run line, and dogs have gone 49-33 on the run line, and the over is hitting at 61% with a record of 47-30 so far. Anything that you're seeing in these early MLB days from a betting perspective yet?
Yeah, I'd throw the Yankees out there too. I mean, they're starting off pretty hot. That lineup certainly looks good. On the player prop side, this guy Bryce Terang in Milwaukee's caught my attention. 6 steals in 4 games. I think that's someone to kind of look at when you're looking at, individual player props. Probably want to make sure he's not, going up against the left-handed starting pitcher, but someone to consider for, will he steal a base, the over, half stolen baseline, something like that. Mookie Betts is really hot right now.
Unreal.
Hitting 500, leading the league in slugging percentage, 5 home runs already. And so that's another one where I'm really big on, seeing how these offensive players have fared historically against the pitchers that they're going up against. But it's like, even if Mookie Betts doesn't have that great of numbers, even if he has like mediocre numbers against a starting pitcher, when you're that hot, you got to still look at those overs for him on those player props for sure.
Mookie Betts, 5 homers, like you said, 11 RBI, 1.4 WAR after 8 games, which is crazy. 605 OBP, around a 1.2 slugging. Incredible start for Mookie. I want to single out Anthony Volpe as well. You talked about the Yankees, and this youngster is having a great start to the season, hitting 529, 9 hits in 5 games. Decent candidate for plus money total bases markets. I believe 4 extra base hits to start the season. So Anthony Volpe there for the Yanks. A highly touted prospect down the years, finally producing some good numbers there for the Bronx Bombers. Are you worried, Tony, about your Oakland A's over win total prop bet?
No, when you make that bet, it's going to be one of those things where you hold your nose. It's going to irritate you throughout the season. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to be a nail biter, but still a good move. I'm going to have a lot of those kicks to the pants throughout the year as they blow leads and things of that nature. Andrew, do you do any MLB live betting throughout the season, or do you do mostly pre-flop stuff?
Mostly pre-flop. I'm not a huge live bettor, full stop, to be honest. It's not something I've dabbled in, and I know it's increased, big time in popularity in the last 5-10 years. Not something I've dabbled in, though. Why do you ask?
I think it's a good opportunity for like an educational moment on this show. I'll just throw it out there. There's a big edge that I think you can get on these sports books with live betting, like late in games. Say it's like, all right, how can I explain this? Let me give you the simplest possible way. Let's say we're going into the 9th inning and the score is tied, and the Yankees have the 3, 4, 5 hitters coming up, and the team that they're playing has the 7, 8, 9 hitters coming up. It's like, well, the game's tied. It's like 2 even teams. That's a huge advantage, the fact that the top of their lineup is coming up. So now if we reverse it and say it's like the 7th inning, you can still project and see, well, Aaron Judge is going to get at least 2 more at-bats and things like that. So when you're live betting, don't just consider, who the closers are. Don't just consider what the score is at the time, but see where teams are at in their lineups and project how many at-bats some of those best hitters are going to get. I think you can give yourself a little edge when live betting.
Yeah, that's a good point for sure, and definitely something that I'm going to take probably in some of these afternoon games now that you've pointed that out. I want to talk NFL win totals real quickly, Tony. I know we don't have schedules yet, but some books have put these win totals out there. So I just want to talk about a few things here real quick. 3 teams, Tony, are tied at the top with 11.5 wins. Who are those teams?
Gotta go 49ers.
Yes.
Yeah, people always sleep on the Chiefs. I guess I'll throw the Chiefs out there again. Chiefs?
Yep.
Okay. 49ers, Chiefs, and that third team. I want to get this. That's why I'm going to take my time on this, because I've got a bad run of trivia on this show. So I'm going to take my time on this one. Who's that third team going to be? I feel like if you're asking me, Andrew, it's a sneaky one.
Not really.
Not so sneaky.
You don't overthink it.
Okay. Ravens?
The Baltimore Ravens is correct.
Okay.
2 teams tied at the bottom with 4.5 wins. Who are those 2 teams?
Teams at the bottom with only 4.5 wins. Cardinals?
No. Good guess.
We're projecting the Cardinals to do okay, huh?
I mean, 6.5.
Okay. All right. Might get some draft help. Maybe a little Marvin Harrison Jr. in the mix could help a little bit there. Yeah. Other teams projected to do poorly. Giants?
No, the Giants are at 6.5 as well. So you're down there at the bottom, like that cluster of bottom teams, but a couple here sort of stand out.
All right, I'm going to throw in the towel. It's probably going to be, is it AFC teams?
Pardon me?
I'm going to throw in the towel. Who are the 4.5s?
It is the New England Patriots.
Oh!
Yep.
It makes sense, though. It makes sense. We're just not used to seeing them down there. Wow.
That's it. And the Carolina Panthers, which I do get.
Of course. Yeah, okay. I was missing the okay, yeah. If you'd given me more time, I would have thought about the Panthers. I would have nailed that. But the Patriots never, you just don't think of them as a losing team. Still, even though they haven't done well the last couple of years. That makes sense. No Belichick. Yep. Wow. It's interesting with these win totals. We got to take into account the extra game now, too.
Yes,
you know
exactly.
What I mean? Like what you had in your mind as a 4.5 win team with a 16-game season is actually different with an extra game on there. So
100%. The 2023 official team of the Huddle was the Houston Texans, Tony. What is their 2024 number at?
Ooh, I've heard a lot of whispers on the Texans. The secret is out. I'm going to say, I think the books want to get ahead of that. How about 9.5?
9.5 is correct. Nailed it. Obviously, the Atlanta Falcons, one of the big movers and shakers in the offseason so far. What is their number at?
I'm going to go with that same number. Give me 9 even on the Falcons.
It is 9.5. You should have stuck with your gut, Tony. It's 9.5. This one's weird. Chicago Bears.
Chicago Bears. That is a weird one, man. This is one I would want no part of until after the draft. But I'm going to go ahead and say 7, 6.5.
It's 8.5.
Whoa, interesting.
Right?
That seems high.
Super high.
Yeah. Wow.
Washington.
Goo.
Your reaction says it all.
6?
It's 6.5. We'll give you that one. We'll give you a half point for that. And then the last one here, Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Bengals. What is their 2024 number at?
9.5?
Very close. A tech high in my opinion, but it's 10.5.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I think the receiving situation is going to look a lot different next year. And
Yep.
that's an interesting one just with Burrow's health too. You know what I mean? You never want to be on the over when you've got a quarterback who has health concerns. And so that's a tricky one to.
Well, dude, when that injury sort of surfaced, like there were, I can't remember if it was players that had suffered something similar or medical professionals that were commenting on it, but something like that is severe to the point that the career's not really the same. Obviously, we want to hope that Joe Burrow is okay and like it's not impacted to that degree, but definitely something to keep an eye on. Any other teams out there you want me? I told you not to look at these yesterday, but any other teams you're interested in just based on their potential number and what that could be?
Yeah, how about hit me with the Cowboys?
The Cowboys, 10.5.
Okay, I can see it. How about the Kirk Cousins-less Minnesota Vikings with their
the
weird
Vikings
quarterback situation right now?
What would you put that at?
Right now, they've got some talent though. Because they won games with Dobbs, you know.
Yeah, they did.
Give me 8.5.
6.5.
Ooh, okay, that seems low. That might be one to attack depending on their quarterback situation if they add someone other, because they've got Darnold right now, right?
Yes, they did pay. They did pay Sam Darnold. What they give him? 10 mil? Good Lord. 8 mil was it? I can't remember.
It's robbing a bank.
And we'll break down some of our favorite win totals in episodes ahead. But one of the next big events on the NFL calendar is the NFL draft. Have you looked at NFL draft markets? Is there anything out there that you see? I know we're pretty nailed on with Caleb Williams potentially going number 1. I'm seeing mocks with QBs going 1, 2, 3, 4. Like JJ McCarthy has soared up mock draft boards and he's going as high as 2. Which is crazy. So is there any spots there that you're noticing that could potentially be valuable for the bettors at home?
Yeah, you bring up the McCarthy thing. I kind of wonder if it's going to be like a Will Levis situation where there's all this chatter about him, going in the top 10, top 5 even, and then he ends up falling a bit. I remember a while back, you and I laughed when, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was a conversation with you where we talked about how Harbaugh said McCarthy was going to be, did he say first quarterback taken or top 5? He said something that at the time seemed very lofty, and we all kind of laughed. Now, that is the chatter, so we'll see what it looks like. Did you see Brian Kelly leaked that Jaden Daniels is going to go number 2? Did you see that?
I did not.
So it wasn't like an official leak, but he said in an interview, someone was just asking him, tell me about Jaden Daniels' skill set, et cetera. And then at the end of the interview, he just kind of said something to the effect of, I think he's going to do a great job for Washington or something like that. So there's some, I put some weight into that because these pro teams call the college teams, and granted, they may not come right out and say, hey, we're going to take your guy at number 2, 100%, no doubt about it. But these coaches have a feel for it. They've had a number of their players get drafted, so they know what those conversations are like when someone really likes them. So unless there's some 3D chess going on here, and the folks over in Washington are, thinking 20 steps ahead and want to get Brian Kelly's hopes up I think there's a chance Jaden Daniels goes number 2, and that's minus 130. So $130 $100 on that. Again, a lot can change between now and the draft, but I think that's something to look at. One thing that's really important with these draft odds and draft props, Andrew, is folks out there need to remember that you can essentially get the same draft pick worded like 4 different ways on a draft board. So here's an example here. We've got, hang on one second. My computer's going crazy. We've got Marvin Harrison Jr., first non-quarterback drafted, minus 500, right? If you think he's going number 4 to the Cardinals, Marvin Harrison, number 4, minus 160. Marvin Harrison, top 5, minus 1,200. Those odds are all very, very different. But if you have conviction that he is going to go number 4 to the Cardinals, the minus 160 is by far the best option there, right? Especially if you're like, you know what? It is going to be 3 quarterbacks, 1, 2, 3. McCarthy's not going to go number 4. So if you have conviction on where someone's going to go, don't just see a prop and bet it. Look around on your website, on your app for similar worded props, because you can often find better odds. We talk a lot about shopping around on different apps. Sometimes you can shop around within your own app and find what is essentially the same bet worded in a slightly different way for very different odds.
Yeah, it's great advice. I'm shocked the best player in the draft, which is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr., has been sort of falling down. Like, it's crazy to me. I know like teams are high on the quarterbacks, but like producer Steve and I talk about this all the time. In like 3, 4, 5 years, we'll be talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. being easily the best player coming out of this draft. We got to wrap it up here, though. We will have a NFL draft special coming up the week of the NFL draft, but we've got Final Four coming up. We will be live on X Spaces per usual, 11:30 Eastern on Saturday. So come chat, come hang. If you've got questions, if you've got concerns, come join and virtually raise your hand and get involved in the conversation about the Final Four. We thank you all for watching. Whatever you do with your bets on the MLB board, in the women's Final Four and the men's Final Four coming up, best of luck, and we will catch you next week right here on The Huddle.